again, Green Spring. Today we're going to talk with Ken Kauke, and you've probably seen him around the campus walking with his wife, Barbara. They do quite a bit of walking. Also, you've probably seen him working with, looks like he understands the system over in the Acatink room, the loudspeaker system, so that's a plus. And you also see him as a member of the resident council. He's our liaison to the finance committee. You might also have read some of his articles in the Villager. And also he runs an investment club. So all of these are some of the things that Ken does around here, and you've seen him doing. Before we get into his life, though, I'd like to hear just a little bit about your family, Ken. Where are they? What do they do?
Well, we have two married sons. The older boy is living in Nashville, or more accurately, Franklin, a suburb of Nashville. He's in the genetics business in a company that was a startup, but he tells us now it's in phase 1, which means they have sales and are generating cash, I think.
Shucks, I was hoping he might work for the Grand Ole Opry.
But basically, what his company does is provide information on genetics testing to hospitals. So he covers major hospitals, particularly children's hospitals. So we get to see him when he calls calls in Baltimore on Johns Hopkins, or even if he goes to Children's Hospital in Philadelphia, he might stop by. And his wife makes jewelry. She does craft jewelry. So at one of the Christmas fairs, we were able to show and sell some of her work.
Oh, okay. But, so the Christmas fair that we have here.
Yeah, that we have at Green Spring. Okay. The other son is a lawyer. He and his wife live in Falls Church, having just moved a year ago from Connecticut Avenue, and they have 2 children. He's 2 girls, 3 3/4, and I guess about 3/4. He's a lawyer with a firm downtown.
So you have really young grandchildren.
Yes, very young. Yes, and
something like Clint Lambert has.
Yeah, very entertaining in the Jefferson dining room on some Sundays. And his wife is an attorney with the criminal side of the Justice Department. So.
Okay, so you get to see the son from around here and your grandchildren.
Yeah, well, that's the reason. That's basically the reason we focused on this area when we were looking to leave New Jersey. We wanted to go south somewhere, but we didn't want to go deep south. And since they're both lawyers and members of the Virginia bar, DC bar, that kind of thing, we figured they're more likely to stay. The other son is more likely to move somewhere, maybe back to Atlanta or something.
Or maybe up to Johns Hopkins.
Or even back to New Jersey.
Yeah. All right. What about your early life, your parents? You can tell us something about them.
Well, my father was an electrical engineer by training, and he worked for the telephone company all his career. And my mother was a stay-at-home housewife when that was a conventional thing. And we lived in a community called Jackson Heights, which is not exactly suburban and not exactly urban. That was started when the subway system or elevated system expanded from New York City out through the borough of Queens in New York. So
I have a grandson that lives in a place, I think it's called City Island, which is just off the Bronx.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And he has a nice little neighborhood of houses and so forth.
Yeah, City Island's a very interesting place, very nautical, lots of boat yards, lots of yacht clubs, and some very good fish restaurants. Interesting place. Mm-hmm.
Okay, well. I see that you went to Yale.
Yes, sir.
And you studied economics and political science. And did you find out what year they beat Army? Was it 54 or 55?
No, I couldn't. When I Googled Army Yale, all of those ROTC topics came up. All the issues over ROTC over the years.
So Google is not as fast. You're supposed to be able to say it. When did Army?
I should have put in Army Yale football, but yeah, Yale did the last time Yale. Well, I think they might be playing them again. I don't know, but they didn't play them for years and years after this one particular game in 1955, which is memorable because they actually they filled the Yale Bowl, which takes some doing. I think it seats 80,000 or something at max, close to that, or it did in those days anyway.
All right. Then in Yale, you had an NROTC scholarship.
Yes.
So were you planning to go into the Navy then?
Yeah, well, I would have gone into the Navy. I would have served, I don't know whether I would have made it a career, but I would have certainly served my term. Back in the 50s, I guess we were in the Korean War, and I guess the Navy had dreams of bigger fleets. So they were interested in expanding the officer corps, and they had this program whereby they provided a scholarship and a monthly stipend if you joined their program, their officer candidate program, which I got into. I lasted 2 years, which included a midshipman cruise in the summer of '54 on the battleship New Jersey, where we went to Europe with the midshipmen from Annapolis. Yeah,
oh, okay.
Yeah. We had, I forget how many we had, but the New Jersey had just been back from Korea, had been ferrying or bringing troops back from Korea, and it was. Yeah.
Did they have the ROTCs from other schools on that cruise, or?
Yeah, yes, they did.
Several other schools, I presume.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know the Navy, the midshipmen take that summer cruise. I didn't realize that other ROTC joined them.
Yeah, I don't know if it's still the case, but it was back then. Yeah.
So the Navy didn't think you're.
Yeah, and then, well, I think the budget got cut, so they were looking for reasons. They tried to get me on color blindness, but they finally. I'd had a mastoid operation on both ears when I was a child, so it wasn't hard to find a hearing problem. Yeah.
Did that clear up, or you I don't.
No, I still have a problem hearing high-pitched female voices. So when particularly consonants, which tend to be harder to hear. Sometimes when women would try to whisper deep secrets to me, I wouldn't hear a word.
I had the same kind of problem. And as a matter of fact, I bought hearing aids just so I could hear my boss, who was, in the first place, very soft-spoken, but she was female also. And it was just difficult to hear. Well, then you went into an Army Reserve program. What?
Yeah, at the time that I guess. I forget where we were. We must have been a relative peace. I forget. It was somewhat after the Lebanon incident. But the Army offered a program whereby you went on active duty for 6 months, served 6 years, 5.5 year additional years as reserve duty, going once a month or whatever it was, and that would take care of your draft obligation. Mm-hmm. So a lot of us chose to do that, and I did. So I went through basic training at Fort Dix.
At Fort Dix.
Yeah, and ended up for the 5.5 months in an office called Enlisted Classification and an Assignment, which is a pretty powerful office.
Was that at Fort Dix too?
At Fort Dix, yes.
Oh, okay. Well, then you weren't really compelled to join the military, except by doing so, I would have been left
myself vulnerable to the draft, however arbitrary that might be. So this was a known. Yeah, electing the program was a known and predictable.
Okay, did you get a job right after Yale, or did you get into graduate school? Or?
Well, after the military, I did go to Wall Street.
So you had you went to Wall Street.
After that 6 months, yeah. After the 6 months active duty, which included basic training, and then 2 months, and then the 4 months, I guess, in the headquarters company.
So you went to Wall Street and got a job.
And then I went to Wall Street and got a job.
When did you decide to get some graduate schooling?
Well, at that time, the firms were willing to pay your tuition if you went to graduate school. NYU had a very renowned business school, and night sessions, and a lot of us went to night classes there, and I did for years.
Well, I attended night classes at NYU too, back in '58 to '60 in mathematics. I drove down. I taught at West Point, and so I drove down late in the afternoon and spent the evening listening to some math instructor, and driving back about 10 o'clock at night, which was 60 miles. Wasn't all that much fun.
Yeah, well, you would have been in Greenwich Village probably.
Yeah.
So I was
14th
downtown, next to behind Trinity Church. There was an old church building that they took over and they used as for the school at that time. No air conditioning.
Okay, early in your career, you went to California.
Yeah, that was after I'd started in the investment business. I was with a firm. And they were bringing they had one man out in the West Coast, a kind of a satellite office in Los Angeles. And they wanted to bring him east, so they sent me west to run the office while he was back in the east.
So this was an assignment from the firm.
Yeah, it was a firm assignment. Yeah.
Well, you also mentioned that you got into the NYSE. What does that stand for? New York State.
Oh, New York Stock Exchange. Yeah.
Oh, stocking.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, because Wall Street from the beginning was all about licensing, and there are more now than there ever were, I guess. More certificates and registrations and what have you. But then, of course, if you're with a investment banking firm, brokerage firm, you had to be registered with the stock exchange if they were a stock exchange member. And I was. And I don't remember how I got into the program, but I know that I was in the program, and what they called the New York Stock Exchange Speakers Bureau. And they would call up with assignments. They may need somebody to go to Yonkers to speak to the local Kiwanis Club at a luncheon or something like that. Or at one time, the Siemens Church Institute, which was an institution downtown that was originally started for seamen when they were in town, but provided all kinds of services. They had an investment class, and they asked me to run their investment class one year. So I did that.
So you got into all sorts of things.
That was in the evening, yeah.
Okay, we haven't talked about meeting Barbara yet. Surely you must have met her around this time.
Yeah, Barbara, of course, was a CPA who was working for a Wall Street accounting firm that did a lot of business, had a lot of accounts that were brokerage firms, investment bankers, and what have you. And she could better tell her story as to why she had gotten bored or just enchanted with the accounting, being at the accounting firm. So she got herself a job with one of their clients, Ladenburg Thalmann, which is an old investment banking firm, where I happened to be working on the bond desk. So that's where we met.
And so you.
Yeah, I think she worked on my expense account.
Oh, is that right? All right. Well, you worked for many different firms, or several different firms during that period. And since we're talking about the banking business and Wall Street and so forth, did you work in the Twin Towers?
I never worked in the Twin Towers. Of course, I spent time in them. At the restaurant, at the club, Windows on the World, I guess it was called, where they had meetings. Of various groups had meetings, and of course we'd go for cocktails sometimes up on the top of the building. So we commuted through the building. We took the ferry across from Hoboken. Originally, we took PATH, which emptied us out in the basement of the World Trade Center, and then when they restarted the ferry.
What's PATH?
Port Authority Trans-Hudson. It was an it was a tunnel, a transit system under the Hudson River, run by the Port Authority. And then eventually a ferry service was restarted, and which also terminated at the World Trade Center. So we used to take that and walk through the World Trade Center, coming and going. And then I did work in, I think it was number 4 World Trade Center, where the commodity exchange was located on one of the upper floors at one time, which is part of the whole complex. So,
well, in your movement throughout the industry, were you able to get more responsibility as time went on? Were you able to achieve?
Yeah, at certain times
upward
I had
mobility, I guess we call it.
Yeah, at certain times I had responsibility running a department, which is its own burden, or at other times I was simply part of a small team that was more or less self-contained and not a hierarchical kind of situation where I was supporting the team.
Well, and you lived initially in Manhattan.
Yes.
For a few years. I presume when the kids were born and so forth.
Now the kids were born in New Jersey.
They were born. So you moved over there before.
Yeah, we were living in Manhattan on 2nd Avenue, pretty noisy location, in the Gramercy Park area, and. One year, the police station, there was a police station across the street from us, and a police academy was in the neighborhood, and the City College School of Penology and Criminology was also in the neighborhood. So the neighborhood was always swarming with police officers from not only New York City, but surrounding areas. And notwithstanding that, one night, somebody put a bottle through our windshield, even though there was a police car parked in front of us and a police car parked behind us. So we decided, and then there was another time when there was a shooting across the street. Somebody tried to hold up an all-night coffee store in the basement of an apartment house, and there happened to be a policeman going in there to get coffee. So he unloaded his weapon in this fellow, and we decided it was time to...
Well, I remember having some concerns like that when we drove down and parked a car on the streets in the lower part of Manhattan going to NYU. That was I was concerned about that.
Some people have, I've seen references to that recently. That there was a period of time when people were somewhat afraid to walk the streets of New York. The streets were somewhat dangerous and out of control. And then, like him or not, under Giuliani, the situation was pretty much cleaned up. He had some really aggressive, strong-minded, thoughtful police commissioners who ran a good operation.
It's interesting how they did clean it up under Giuliani.
They did.
It's interesting how the influence of a guy like Giuliani could really impact the crime scene in New York.
Yeah.
Or it was you do pinpoint Giuliani in doing that.
Yeah, he had this philosophy that if you take care of the little things, then the big things, and you also have to make yourself available and visible. I think he wanted to have cops on the, in the community, visible and part of the community kind of thing, rather than just driving around in cars that somewhat isolated from people.
Let's get into your world now of finance. And you used the term, you worked on the institutional sales side of the industry, concentrating on debt instruments and their derivatives. Just what are you talking about?
Well,
let's see if we can define some of those terms.
Okay.
Debt instruments, derivatives.
In those days, at least, the industry structure somewhat changed. But in those days, it was pretty much retail brokerage and institutional sales.
Retail brokerage meaning selling
individuals,
stocks and bonds.
Stocks, bonds, mutual funds, and what they call product now to individuals. And the institutional side of the business was accommodating bank trust departments, bank portfolios, insurance companies, pension funds, and so on, investment advisors, mutual funds, the whole works.
Mm-hmm. And the derivatives?
Well, the bonds, of course, is I worked at several aspects of the bond market, the municipals, and also in corporates. And in corporates, I was part of for a long time, I was part of a specialized segment of that industry, which was secondary private placements. There'd been a lot of privately, that is to say, unregistered with the SEC, issues that had been placed with institutional investors over the years. And as interest rates changed and market situations changed, the pension funds who own these privately placed debt issues decided they'd rather have their money elsewhere. So we created a market whereby we bought these private placements at a discount and sold them to insurance companies who could take advantage of the capital gain that was built into the discount. So the pension fund didn't have a tax, was tax exempt, so they weren't giving up anything, and the insurance company was taxable, so they were gaining a kind of lower tax rate for the discount. So it was a specialized nook kind of industry.
These aren't shenanigans, are they?
That was legal, although although New York State did have a law that anything having to do with, I think, real estate or a mortgage supposedly had to be registered before it was traded, but we kind of assumed that didn't apply to institutions.
Politicians talk about Wall Street, and Wall Street, usually they talk about it in a derogatory term. Could you explain why they talk about Wall Street in a derogatory term, and perhaps why it isn't a derogatory term?
Well, of course, there are different people in different groups who are taking issue with Wall Street in quotes. Part of it is the 1% versus the 99%. This notion that Wall Street and the bankers in general have done very well over the last 10 or 15 years, but the major part of the population, the 99% or flyover country, whatever you want to call it, has really done nothing and may even have lost some buying power. The income hasn't gone anywhere, particularly after inflation and taxes and so on. And also, I think there's some disappointment that there are no criminal indictments against the banks after all of their, felonious activity in recent years.
Well, speaking of, let's go back then a few years to the housing bubble, which really created a major problem. And it was my feeling that perhaps the people who lowered the standards for loans were probably more at fault in creating that than the banks themselves, because they insisted that the banks provide loans for people who really weren't qualified.
Yeah, it's not. As it turned out, the media tended to focus on the housing aspect, on the mortgage aspect, which wasn't really the core problem.
Oh.
The core problem was probably the derivatives. AIG, for instance, supposedly an insurance company, wasn't particularly in the mortgage business. They were one of the major failures, their subsidiary. But they were trading all kinds of derivatives. They were actually trading precious metals like silver. Uh-oh. And they weren't only trading these things, as you understand, trading a spot commodity, but they were trading all kinds of complicated financial instruments that related to these things. And I could talk for a long time about derivatives. There was a time when a lady lawyer named Brooksley Bourne tried to get Washington to regulate derivatives, but she was opposed by just about everybody, both parties, by legislators and the SEC and the Treasury Department. Everybody was opposed to her, and she turned out to be right. Yeah. She understood the business because as a lawyer, she'd been deeply involved in trying to arrange a merger between a major London firm and a major New York firm, so she had to learn the business, and she knew what it was all about.
Well, but go ahead.
Yeah, but I think the basic problem was the explosion in derivatives. It happened that the bubble exploded. The explosion of the bubble happened with the Bear Stearns mortgage funds first collapsing in 2008, I think that was. But and mortgages were a big problem, no document mortgages and all of those things. But that was just really frosting. The real problem, I think, was the derivative and the exposures of the banks to the derivative market.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Well, I hope we all understand just a little bit more about that. I would ask one more question, if you could answer it in about 1 minute. The Dodd-Frank regulations that came out after this housing bubble, what impact did that have on you in Wall Street?
Well, my understanding of Dodd-Frank is the basic outcome is that it created new cost burdens for smaller banks. That is to say, the cost of compliance became greater for smaller banks that aren't involved in all of these speculative derivative activities. The bigger banks were largely, as far as I know, able to escape any real harm from Dodd-Frank. Citibank was able to get some major changes put into the legislation just before it passed, after the, I guess, Senate House conference. And I think, of course, they were able to by leaning on the various agencies, they can dull the effect of the regulations. So, you know.
Okay, we're down to 2 minutes. Can you believe it? I have let's talk about your moving to Green Spring. It must have been a big change coming from the metropolitan area of New Jersey and New York to come to the halcyon halls of Green Spring.
Well, no, I like to say we live on the street side of Canterbury Square, so I still get a little traffic after, but I miss not living on 2nd Avenue. But we lived in suburban Ridgewood for over 30 years, which was relatively quiet.
Pretty much like the suburbs around here.
Yeah, pretty much like the suburbs around here. The only thing being that Ridgewood was an organic town. It had a town hall and a downtown, which Springfield, of course, does not enjoy.
Okay, you became active when you came here.
Yes.
And I remember you and Barbara both from the early days that you moved in. You very quickly got on the committee. Mm-hmm. Now you're the liaison to the Finance Committee. Barbara's been active too. And as a matter of fact, you and Barbara were very active in volunteering last winter at the snowstorm to serve behind the lines.
Actually, that was Barbara's doing.
That was Barbara's doing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Actually, the Hardings, I think, called Barbara because they came up with the idea, Chuck and Carla, and but they knew Barbara had the mailing list, the email list, so they called her, and she made the email lists available, and you know, after checking, and they went from there. So
well, it was you know, a big benefit for all of us at Green Spring. I just wanted to thank you for doing that. One other question: you got any ideas about things that are you're up to now? Any other new things?
Well, I'm going to be starting. I've had some interest in starting up a basic investing course. Oh. So in September.
You're not doing that now?
No. Now that the investment discussion group is pretty much reviewing the financial news in a PowerPoint presentation at a relatively, complicated level. But I'm going to start a basic investing course, which will be a DVD of a Duke professor for 30 minutes. Oh. And then we'll have a question and answer and try to look up the answers together on the internet using the computer and the projector.
You want to show your slide on that?
Yeah. Who do I show that to?
Yeah, well, just hold it up. And
just hold it up and somewhere
just
we'll
hold it down on a table so it's solid. There we go.
Yeah, this is a slide I showed to the group on Tuesday at the investment discussion group.
Okay.
I hope it's right side up.
It is. Sounds interesting, Ken. Well, we're out of time, so I had a couple more questions, but we'll have to forego them. Thank you very much for coming on Who's Who. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you for inviting me. It's been fun.